Hello, welcome everyone to another Insights Alliance webinar. I hope you're all doing okay today. So today, in celebration of the ABBA reunion, we're going to do a bit of a greatest hits webinar. We're going to look back at all the data that we've gathered so far and take a little bit of a step back to see what the trends are over the time, because we've got so much data now over a good period that we can start to see some real trends in that data. And we're then going to also look at the trajectories, if I can even say that word, that we might be able to predict into the future. Then we're going to take a brief look at some of the very latest data on what audiences are saying about the experience, the audiences that have returned since July, and see what conclusions we think we can draw from that for both communications and programming, particularly over the autumn and the winter. So first to introduce my fellow band members, David Rees and Robin Cantrell-Fenwick from Baker Richards, to help me in this task. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Robin for the big picture stuff. Robin.
Thank you very much, Katie. Really not sure which one of us is Benny and which one's Bjorn, but maybe we should let that go. So just to set some quick context, the shape of this graph is going to look familiar to lots of us in the UK. This is COVID cases on the top line, people being admitted to hospital on the bottom line. So you can see on the chart that we have highlighted the beginning and end of the first lockdown. We've also highlighted the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which subsidised visits to restaurants and cafes. We've highlighted the period around kind of October and November 2020, when we had a mix of local and national lockdowns and a regional tier system. And then the third national winter lockdown as well on that chart. The next chart is a zoom in to that bottom blue line, which is the hospitalisations. So here we're just looking at that additional bit of detail that shows us that for the moment, the UK's vaccination programme appears to have very substantially broken the link between cases and hospitalisations, though there is some rising speculation that the NHS might be struggling to cope with those 900 COVID admissions a day, and that this new level may not actually be sustainable. But we're going to be using some of these highlighted areas that we're showing there, the pink shaded areas, in graphs throughout today's presentation. So let's look at some data that may look a little bit less familiar. This is data from the Office of National Statistics, and these lines show spending in drinking places in the purple and eating places in the blue, and it's all indexed starting against February 2020. So following the journey across the chart, you see the restaurant and leisure spend take a bit of a dive in the first lockdown, rise substantially with Eat Out to Help Out, tail off again during the next two lockdowns, and as of the beginning of July, it was reported as being around 70% of that February pre-pandemic level. So 70% of a pre-pandemic winter month. What this chart shows is the really strong link between government policy and the leisure economy. So many cultural organisations are really closely intertwined with these food and beverage businesses. So understanding what's going on in them is really important context. And finally, we'll just take a look at the, if you like, the public interest, literally what the public are interested in based on search terms typed into Google. We're seeing here searches for COVID in red, theatre in blue, museums in purple. And although there are peaks and troughs, actually COVID searches are fairly static. There's much more movement in searches for theatre in the blue and for museums in the purple, which dropped so sharply throughout the pandemic. But again, for theatre, searches are currently running at about 70% of a pre-pandemic winter level, while museums are just about back up to full strength. So in a moment, I am going to hand over to David. He's going to look not just at the latest data from Culture Restart, but we're going to pick out a few key measures and see how they've changed over time. So we're looking at about 165,000 responses across 3 surveys dating back from May 2020 to August 2021. And with some of the measures, we're going to project into the future. And I want to stress that these are not forecast models. They are a picture of what would happen if audience sentiment continued to change at the current pace. So you might remember from Brexit that there was a lot of talk of reasonable worst case scenarios. Well, these are going to be reasonable best case scenarios. What would happen if we have a good winter, we keep on track, and audience sentiment isn't substantially buffeted by any of the changes that may lie ahead? So do just bear that in mind when you see these projections. And with that, I will hand over to David to take us forward.
Thanks, Robin. So as Robin said, these are going to be a look back at some of the questions that we've been asking since the start of the pandemic, when we were tracking audience sentiment and seeing how they've changed over time. So the first question that we're going to look at here is, we asked people when they were likely to book tickets again. And what we're showing here on this chart is, in black, those people who had already booked. So that's good. Those people who were planning to book in the next 6 months in this blue area here. And then right at the top, those people who were basically saying they were unsure. So whether that was over 6 months away or just generally unsure. And obviously over time, we can see that the area in black at the bottom, those who have booked, has risen from 20% back in the start of the pandemic, all the way up to about 60%, just under 60% by July 21. However, you can see at the top, 20% of people still remaining unsure. And what you can also see, there's a few kind of dips in this overall kind of increase in the number of people who are booking around the start of the second lockdown and the start of the third lockdown. So again, very much that emphasis on the kind of government policy affecting people's confidence about booking tickets again. So what happens then if we say, this trend, take this trend here, rising from back in May 20 through to June, July 21, and if we project that forwards into the future for a moment, this is what the graph looks like over that kind of future, the next few months. So that this is just simply taking the trend line from this period here and projecting it forwards. And we can see, if that were to happen, and all things being equal, we'd see that by about March 22, most of the regular arts attenders who had booked and attended the arts in the past will have booked again. Whether or not that will come through, we can only hope, but that's what the trend is showing us at the moment. So other questions that we were asking people, how do people feel about the removal of all COVID safety measures and venues operating as normal? So here, there's a slight difference in the question from the first surveys from the Culture Restart tracker surveys compared with the Experience survey. So essentially, in the kind of first part of this chart from October through to June 21, the responses were uncomfortable, okay, or essential. And then when we moved into July, the question changed slightly so that it was less likely, no difference, or more likely. But what we can see is there's quite a large proportion of people who are still feeling uncomfortable or less likely to attend if venues were to remove all safety measures and operate as normal. But you can still see that slowly this is moving in the right direction. So paying particular attention to the red. And again, there was more of a drop at the start of the third lockdown. And then as we moved out of that third lockdown, as cases came down, we could see a slight increase in the number of people who were feeling okay with it. So if we project this one forwards, again, similar kind of caveats apply around it simply being a projection of the trend that was picking up from the kind of summer months. But that going forward shows that by about March 22 again, about 10% of people would be less likely to attend if a venue had no restrictions. So there's, again, reassurances that if that trend does continue, spring 22 is looking like a lot more normal than it had been. Mask wearing. So we asked people how they felt about mask wearing as a requirement. And again, there's the difference in the question from the culture restart tracker compared to the experience. And we can see that the red at the top, so uncomfortable or less likely, it's not really changed that much. People still like masks, as we can see down here. Most people are saying it would make them more likely to attend. It's dropped a little bit from July into August. The people who definitely don't like masks still remains around 20% of people. But again, if we project that trend forwards, oh yeah, and there's the little arrow to show again the importance of the third lockdown and external factors on all of this. But projecting that little trend forwards here, we can see that over time, by again March 22, mask wearing would end up making more people less likely to attend than it would more likely to attend, with most people actually falling into the middle. But again, this is just a projection of the trend, not a forecast as to what may happen by March 22. What about socially distanced seating? So this, for most people, having socially distanced seating as an option isn't a problem. No one's uncomfortable with it. Well, I say no one. There's about 10% of people who are saying it would make them less likely. So they're certainly in the minority. But you can see that from July 20 through all the way through to kind of June 21, there was a drop in how many people saw it as essential. This change in question still suggests that most people are saying it would make them more likely to attend. But again, that's dropped slightly. And if we project this into the future, what we find is by about March 22, there's about the same proportion of people who would say it would make them less likely to attend as it would more likely to attend. So again, I think the point of comparison here is with mask wearing. So with mask wearing, we saw that the increase in it making them less likely was stronger. So there were more people saying less likely, whereas socially distanced seating, the change is more gradual. So people don't see it as a problem. And I guess one of the reasons why you may say that is because socially distanced seating isn't really a chore for people to kind of sit through. You know, everyone likes a bit more space. And then what about a vaccine passport required for attendance? So this question only came in to our tracker in February 21, so we don't have as far back to go on this, but it hasn't really changed. So across that period from February 21 to June 2021, those few months, the proportion who said it would be essential was about 10%. Most people, though, were fairly okay with it. Moving, though, into July and August, when the question changed slightly, now we've got about half of the people saying it would make them more likely to attend, and only a minority, again 10%, saying it would make them less likely to attend. So most people are feeling okay about this. And we haven't projected this into the future because actually the change in the trend here is so static, it would just show the same thing. And obviously it's dictated more by what government policy is than potentially by what people think about it. Another question that we asked was how people felt about cultural venues being safe to visit. So again, going all the way back to October on this one, in green, we've got those people who agreed that most cultural venues were safe to visit. Grey is the neutral, and then only a small proportion of people saying they disagree. What you can see over time, it's subtle, but there is definitely a change here from 70% back in October 20 through to now about 80%. So it's been increasing slowly, I think, but more positively, most people agree that cultural venues are safe to visit, or they're neutral about it, and only a very small minority are saying that it's not. But again, there's kind of two dips in here that occur at the start of the third lockdown, when obviously cases were at their highest, January 21 being a very difficult month. But then again in June 21, and that coincides with when venues were told that indoor venues were told that they could reopen with socially distanced seating. So that knocked confidence a little bit. And then the final trend that we wanted to look at over a longer period was digital engagement. So this one's slightly different start here. So the first chart that we're looking at here shows what proportion of those that we were surveying had engaged with digital in the kind of pre-COVID days. So that's this 20% of people over here. The blue is showing how many were kind of new to digital engagement during COVID. So that's 41%. So that's a significant increase in the number of people who were engaging for the first time during COVID. And then the remaining 40% have just not engaged with digital either pre or post COVID. But 3 in 5 people have now engaged, or 3 in 5 of regular arts attenders have now engaged with digital. So if we look at interest over time, this again going all the way back to October 20, and the question being how interested were people in engaging with digital culture online. The green are those that were very interested. So a minority, but a very stable minority of just under 10%. The light green were interested, and this has shifted slightly. So this is falling. So from 40% high, and actually it hit 40% again in the January month, which was obviously challenging for other reasons, but digital engagement interest went up slightly. And then since then, it's kind of been tailing off, and you can see that dropping from January through to June 21. You can see the number of people who are neutral, roughly the same proportion of about 30%. But you can also see that there's been an increase in people who are not really interested in orange and not at all interested in red. So again, if we, that's the January peak. If we project this forwards, what does that mean for digital in future? Well, if that trend of declining interest does continue, if we go to our kind of March period, we still, the people who are really interested is today is at 10%. They're kind of, there's a core of people who are interested regardless in digital. The interested rather in green drops down to about 15%, and then everyone else is kind of neutral or not interested. And then all the way kind of into the further into the future, in October 22, which is obviously getting very spurious by then, but still at that point we're getting kind of overall interest, which is both this very interested and interested, down to about 20%, which coincidentally is about the same as the proportion who were engaging pre-COVID. So what that means for digital, I think it's still an open question. So just a few then takeaways from that section. I think it's really clear that the trends are moving in the right direction. So there's a lot of positive kind of news coming out of this. The safety measures continue to be important, certainly for autumn and winter. So there's still a kind of nervousness around COVID, but there's obviously signs of a tentative recovery here. But what obviously would disrupt that significantly would be another kind of big wave. As we saw, January 21 was a very challenging month. If cases were to kind of pick up again significantly, or actually more the hospitalizations picking up, or a government-imposed lockdown, that would obviously have a significant impact. And then finally, digital engagement with culture is really at a crossroads. How organizations make the most of those people who came on board with digital during COVID and continue their interest is, again, a big question going forwards for a lot of organizations. So with that, I believe I'm now handing back over to Katie.
Thank you. I just find that fascinating, totally fascinating to look back over all of that and see how things have changed. But what we're going to quickly, just briefly do now is have a look at the latest results from the Experience survey. So this is the survey that we've been doing with organisations who have managed to reopen with audiences who have returned. So this is tracking since the 19th of July, Freedom Day, or so-called Freedom Day in England, although I'm aware that for other nations that may not have happened in the same way yet, or to the same extent. To those of you who always want to know about the split of age, 30% are over 65 and 20% under 45. So it's very much a sort of typical, regular, core culture-going audience, and 88% are from outside London. So it's very much representative of the kind of regional venue base. Some of the questions that we're going to answer in this section are, so who is going to what? If we're looking at who actually has been, what proportion of people are going to socially distanced and non-socially distanced performances, and how, if at all, does that affect the experience of attending? And secondly, the audience experience and confidence, how do they feel having attended, and would they recommend the experience to other people? And we'll come back to that because that's quite crucial. So first of all, we've looked at this in 2-week chunks, 3 lots of 2 weeks. So in weeks 1 to 2, you can see about half and half were attending socially distanced performances and non-socially distanced performances. But obviously, as more venues have opened up with non-socially distanced, that's increased up to 58% of performances without social distancing. And if we look at that by age, it's worth pointing out that it's typically the younger demographic who are more likely to have attended the shows without social distancing. There's fewer of the under 45s attending the socially distanced performances. Now, I think this one's really interesting because a few people have said to me, oh, well, you know, we know that audiences don't want to come to shows with social distancing because the atmosphere just isn't there. Well, that's not what audiences are telling us. So overall, 87% of people are saying there was a great atmosphere, and there's really very little difference between the people who attend a socially distanced performance and a non-socially distanced performance. Now, obviously, this is going to depend hugely on what type of show it is. If you were going to see a band and the experience was usually everybody standing up and jumping around, then I imagine it wouldn't be these sort of figures. But at the moment, with the sample of performances we've had and the range of venues we've had, that's what they're telling us, which I think is quite interesting. Okay, so then we move on to experience and confidence. 80% of audiences agreed or strongly agreed that they felt confident the venue had measures in place to keep them safe. So they're really, as we've seen before in the results we shared with you, they're really happy with what you're doing as venues to keep them safe. There is quite a significant difference between socially distanced attenders at 92% and non-socially distanced attenders at 68%, but 68% is still very high, so there's high levels of confidence. And 3/4 agreed or strongly agreed that they were able to forget about safety and simply enjoy themselves, because let's face it, that's what they're coming to try and do. And again, that was higher for socially distanced than non-socially distanced attenders. But overall, 3/4 saying that they can just forget about it. What a great release for people to come to a venue and experience that after all of this. Then we asked them how they felt about the recent visit, and you'll have seen Robin and I, if you've been on webinars before, show some of these figures. But we asked them before they attended how they felt about attending, and only 28% said brilliant. But afterwards, that rises to 60%, and overall 82% felt brilliant or fairly happy after attending. So this shows that confidence increases by the act of attending. So it's really significant that if we can just, even if people are feeling, you know, there's slightly anxious there, is 17% before they're coming, but it's right down to 5% once they've actually been. So just the act of attending can build that confidence. And that's reflected in the Net Promoter Score of 60. Those of you who haven't seen this before, this range goes from -100 to +100. And it's that question that you get asked on nearly everything, you know, how likely would you be to recommend us to a friend or colleague? And depending on your answer, it gives a score overall of between -100 and +100. So a score of 60 is just needling into the green area there, which is very good. And then if we do the old-fashioned star rating, 4.5 stars out of 5. If you're reviewing this performance experience or exhibition, how many stars would you give it? 4.5 out of 5. And that's the same for both socially distanced and non-socially distanced performances. So I suspect they're probably have in mind the artistic content there of what they're seeing. But that's very, very strong. So my key takeaways from this are really that events that appeal to a younger audience are likely to sell better as non-socially distanced experiences in the short term, based on the data that we've looked at, whilst those which attract an older audience may need to keep an element of social distancing or an option throughout autumn and winter, if that is possible. And I recognise that's not always the case. And then the final point I'd just like to make is, I don't know if many of you heard me talk about my 5 reassurances for reopening, and we've got a blog on that on our website. But one of the things that we concentrated on was the kind of social proof. And I think now is the time to start dialing that up a bit over safety measures. So using endorsements from other customers, images of customers enjoying themselves, vox pops, quotes, that sort of thing. Obviously, the safety thing is still really important, but particularly for audiences who've already attended, they're really confident with your safety measures now. So it's really about that social proof. So I would encourage you to use that in your communications a bit more. But that then leads us on to the question of, well, what about the audiences who haven't returned yet? So, we've been tracking everybody over time. We've talked to the audiences who have been back, but what about those audiences that for whatever reason have chosen to stay away and either haven't attended or don't have a booking in the diary? Well, we're just about to launch, or we have launched for sign-ups, but it will be starting next week, our Missing Audiences survey, which again is free to take part. And the idea is that you send this to people who haven't got a booking in the diary and haven't been since COVID hit. So again, you would have real-time access to your results. And again, we would be gathering the results of that and sharing them in a webinar like this. So please do sign up if you haven't already. And the final plug is just to say, we're still running experience survey as well. So if you haven't opened yet, or you're just in the throes of reopening and you want to get that initial response from your customers who are reattending, you can do that with the experience survey, as well as obviously surveying the missing audiences as well through the other survey. So do please get in touch if you'd like to be part of either of those and you're not already. So that's all the stuff we've got to throw at you today. The slides will be available as usual afterwards. Flo will send them out. So I'm going to hand over to Robin now to handle any Q&A, and hopefully you've got some questions for us.
Thank you very much, Katie. And just say, yes, please do put your questions in the questions box to the right of the video on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have some people also watching on Facebook today. You can type into the comments box on Facebook and those comments will come through as well. Number of people have said thank you very much for the presentation, and it's always really great to have that feedback. Thank you so much. As ever, when we deliver one of these webinars, there are events surrounding us. There's news stories and news coverage, and one of the things which is very much in the headlines at the moment is the prospect of COVID status certification. Looks likely that some form of requirement to check COVID certification is coming down the line for at least some parts of the sector. Not yet sure where the cutoff will be. Katie, I wonder if I can just turn to you and ask you, what does our data show about how audiences feel about COVID status certification?
Well, I think from what David has shown us is that actually from an audience sentiment point of view, it wouldn't be a huge problem. Now, that isn't to say there might be lots of other reasons why it might be a problem from an access and inclusion point of view. But I think it's only around 10% of people, even less, who would have a problem with having to show, I think we talked about vaccine passports. So it's not going to damage sales from a commercial point of view if it was introduced. Operationally, I'm sure it's an absolute nightmare. And as I say, access and inclusion wise, it's very difficult to square that for a lot of organisations with their access and inclusion policy. So it's not straightforward, but I don't think it's going to be hugely damaging to sales.
Thank you very much. We've observed in our discussions before we started the stream that as we look at those projections, for a lot of organisations, there will be quite a neat alignment. When we're looking at kind of March 22 as a really critical month, there's a really neat alignment with the end of the autumn-winter season for a lot of organisations, and the beginning of the spring-summer season. So, David, I wonder if we can just rewind slightly and I think March 22 is going to stick out in a lot of people's minds. It's not a model, is it? How certain are you that is how things will play out?
Look, all I did, in it's not sophisticated modelling. It's not taking into account any external factors in any of the trajectories that go forwards. It was simply looking at the trend lines up to the point at which we have the latest data, say August 21, and saying simply, what happens if that trend line continues in that direction, unaffected by anything else? Where will we end up? I think that I'm more confident perhaps in the trajectory right at the start, which showed how many people are booking again, because that's a really long, clear trend line all the way from May 2020 through to the end of July, and that has been increasing at a fairly steady rate the entire time. So there's nothing necessarily to say that that's the one that would be derailed, because even with the lockdowns, you can see the second lockdown is a little bit of a dip in November 20, which is curious. I guess it went down because people were kind of returning tickets and refunding, so we've lost some of those bookers there. It went down again a little bit in the third lockdown. But over that longer period, that has been increasing at roughly the same rate. So hopefully you could say that by March 22, everybody who was attending the arts kind of pre-COVID will have at least booked something to attend in future.
But we don't know when that attendance will be, do we? Because they may be booking something for a year after that. So it's, yes. I wouldn't want anybody to think that by March next year, we'll be back up to pre-COVID levels of audiences actually attending. And I do think that the autumn-winter period could be a bit bumpy. So I think being ready for that over the autumn-winter and hopefully starting to really see the light at the end of the tunnel by March would just be fabulous. 2 years on.
Yeah, and one of the messages that we were at pains to kind of state is just that really clear linkage between government policy and government action, and what then happens in our industry. We had a question come in which to remind us of the dates of the missing audiences survey. So let me just pop those back up on the screen. Katie, why don't you just remind us of how this is working?
Yeah, so you're welcome to sign up now, and you can send your missing audiences survey out any time between the 13th of September and the 24th of October. You don't have to send it out every week, or you can send it out in batches if you want to. It's entirely up to you, but that's when we'll be doing the data collection. And then we'll do another round in January and February so that we can see what's changed. We think it's more useful to do it like that than just sort of keep it rolling. And hopefully, obviously, if you're not open by then it's suitable to be used for you. But if you are opening, you might want to start with the experience survey and then follow on with the missing audiences for those who don't come or haven't got a booking.
Great, thank you very much. And there's a question in there. If you've signed up and haven't heard back from us yet, you will hear back from us very soon. We do encourage you to take part in that, and very much encourage you, please, to keep sending the surveys. We know that people are finding these webinars useful. We only have the data if the venues send the surveys, so do please continue to send those surveys for the benefit of the sector, for the benefit of your colleagues. You can see the hashtag there, Insights Alliance. Do continue the conversation on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. We're absolutely delighted to receive kind of questions and comments, and let us know what you'd like to hear from future webinars. For now though, we will wrap up. So from Katie, David and myself, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.